Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture Lecture Series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine.
I invented a second internet in 1982. I programmed that new internet in the 1980s. I visualized my new global network as 2 raised to power 16 commodity off-the-shelf processors that were identical to each other, that were tightly coupled to each other. I visualized each processor as operating its own operating system. I visualized each processor as having its own dedicated memory that shared nothing with each other. I visualized my new internet as outlined by the 1 binary million bidirectional edges that were defined by the 64 binary thousand vertices of the 16-dimensional hypercube that was tightly circumscribed by a 16-dimensional hypersphere that was embedded into a 16-dimensional mathematical hyperspace. I mathematically visualized my 16-dimensional internet as occupying the space of a soccer field rather than encircling planet Earth that has a diameter of 7,926 miles. I mathematically visualized my 16-dimensional internet as outlined by 64 binary thousand identical processors, or as many tiny identical computers. I visualized those tiny computers to be uniformly distributed across the 15-dimensional hypersurface of the hypersphere in hyperspace. I mathematically visualized those tiny computers that defined my 16-dimensional internet as braided together by 1 binary million email wires that were orthogonal to each other and that were perpendicular in 16 directions and in as many dimensions. I was recognized for inventing 2 new internets because the 2 internets that I invented were previously unseen and unrecognized as internets. I'm Philip Emeagwali. I am the only father of the internet that invented a new internet. The inventor sees her invention first within her mind before seeing it with her eyes. In the 1970s and 80s, I saw and programmed my 16-dimensional internet, and I did so when 25,000 supercomputer scientists only saw a network of 2 raised to power 16 or 65,536 central processing units that could not be programmed to solve as many challenging problems, but also could not be programmed to reduce 65,536 days or 180 years of time to solution on only one computer to only 1 day of time to solution across that new supercomputer that is not a computer per se, but that is an internet de facto, and that is a virtual supercomputer. But inside my mind, I saw a new internet, and I did so where 25,000 supercomputer scientists saw an old computer. Merely seeing something that was never before seen and only seeing that thing with our eyes is not discovering that thing. It is seeing something that was never before seen and seeing that thing inside our minds and understanding that thing that was previously misunderstood that leads to the scientific discovery of that thing. I saw a new internet that was never before seen. I saw that new internet inside my mind. My new internet was not understood as a computer or as an internet. I invented a new supercomputer that is also a new internet de facto. I am the only father of the internet that invented a new internet. I'm Philip Emeagwali. My 16-dimensional internet was as minimal as a sphere, but yet as delicately complex as a parallel supercomputer. I figured out how to program my internet and do so via email messages that I sent to and received from my 16-bit long email addresses. I was the lone and the first supercomputer programmer to visualize his parallel processed codes as transported along email pathways that had a one-to-one correspondence with the bidirectional edges of the hypercube in 16-dimensional hyperspace. I combined that 16-dimensionality with the computer algorithm that I used to solve my 24 million algebraic equations. In the 1980s, that was the world's largest system of equations ever solved. I integrated my 64 binary thousand processors into one synchronized, harmonious, and seamless supercomputer that executed the fastest calculations and did so while solving grand challenge problems that arose in mathematics, science, and engineering. I visualized my internet in the 16th dimension. I visualized the data called the initial and boundary conditions of the initial boundary value problem of calculus, and I visualized them differently and as 65,536 sets of initial boundary value problems. In contrast, other research mathematicians and supercomputer scientists visualize the same grand challenge problem as merely one problem. I visualize each initial boundary value problem in the 16 perpendicular directions of the 16-dimensional hyperspace. In science fiction, the hyperspace is a fictional space in which extraordinary events can happen. On the 4th of July, 1989, one such extraordinary event happened and did so when I parallel processed across a 16-dimensional hyperspace to discover the world's fastest computer that was outlined by 2 raised to power 16 processors. The science fiction that became my reality was once the cover story of the January 11, 1946 issue of the New York Times. That issue of the New York Times described parallel processing as simultaneously solving 100 mathematical physics problems and solving them with 100 computers that could forecast the weather all over the world. Back then, in 1946, one computer weighed as much as 400 persons. That New York Times article of 1946 suggested that in the future, and I quote, the United States would be divided into blocks penetrating into the stratosphere. End of quote. Fast forward 43 years to the 4th of July 1989, I figured out how to parallel process by dividing the United States into 64 binary thousand blocks, each penetrating into the stratosphere. My discovery of parallel processing, or emailing and solving a million problems at once, was later highlighted in the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal. 11 years later, my invention of a new supercomputer was reconfirmed by then US President Bill Clinton and reconfirmed in his presidential lecture of August 26, 2000 that was delivered to the Nigerian Parliament in Abuja, Nigeria. In my vision across hyperspace, my email messages flew like a swarm of 16 colored birds. I visualized my emails dancing across every nook and crevices of my 1 binary million email wires. I imagined that someday those forests of processors or tiny computers and email wires could encircle the earth in the way the atmosphere enshrouded the earth. I, the supercomputer programmer, parallel processed across the 16th dimension. I parallel processed by trying to twist and fuse together the bidirectional edges and vertices of the hypercube that I projected onto the hypersurface of a hypersphere. I parallel processed by using email techniques that reduced my 64 binary thousand processors that tightly encircled a globe that shared nothing to one seamless cohesive supercomputer that is the world's fastest computer.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.